Hello and welcome to pmclounge.com. In this video, we are doing an up-close look at the concepts of Scrum and Sprint. This video is going to be extremely helpful if you're taking up your PMP exam that now contains 50% Agile questions. Also, this video is going to be helpful if you're preparing for your PMI-ACP certification as well. So stick around and let's take a look at the Scrum and Sprint, the important concepts of these two. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you, please hit the like button. That seems to be the only way YouTube is going to let you know every time we upload new content. So when it comes to taking an up and close look at Scrum and Sprint, the concepts related to these two, you need to understand four things: sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. So let's get started with what sprint planning really is. So sprint planning is essentially a meeting. And before that, you need to understand what a sprint is, which is mentioned here in this box. Sprint is a time boxed iteration. That means there is a time box which needs to be followed for a sprint. Most teams use 2 week sprint, but you can also see 30 days sprint in action. So either you will see 2 week sprint, you will also see 30 days sprint, or you can also see some companies do sprints for 3 weeks. So it basically depends on department to department, company to company, how long sprint they want to basically go for. So it is a time boxed iteration, which means it is an iterative thing. It happens again and again in a certain time box. So let's talk about sprint planning again. It is basically a meeting and it comprises of the entire team. It includes your scrum master. It also includes the product owner. For a 30-day sprint, because like I said earlier, a sprint could be 2 week long or 30-day or any other time box for that matter. So for a 30-day sprint, this meeting, the sprint planning meeting, is time box for 8 hours. That means for a 30-day sprint, this meeting should not exceed 8 hours. But if you have, let's say, a 2 week sprint, this meeting is going to be 4 hours long. So this is the time box that sprint planning meeting needs to follow. And all the four meetings that we are going to talk about: sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, sprint retrospective, all of them have a certain time box that they follow. Now, each time box is divided into two halves. So, what do we do in each of these two halves is what we are going to look at now. But understand the fact that whether you're doing a 30-day sprint or a 2 week sprint, you have a time box for sprint planning. You will have to finish this meeting within that time box. So now that time box is divided into two halves. In the first half, the team is going to figure out exactly what can be achieved in the sprint. What can be done in this 30-day or 2 weeks long sprint, right? To begin with, how do you figure this out, right? So to begin with, a sprint goal is defined, and this is basically something as precise as one or two sentences, which defines the goal of the sprint, the goal for your next 2 weeks or next 30 days or next 3 weeks, whatever time box your sprint is in. So you define a goal for that time box. Items are then pulled from the product backlog to create the sprint backlog. So these items could be features, bug fixes, whatever that's present in the product backlog is pulled into the sprint backlog. And sprint backlog basically contains everything that the team is going to build during the sprint. So if you have, let's say, 2 weeks long sprint, what all is the team going to build in those 2 weeks is going to be part of the sprint backlog. So what can be achieved in the sprint, in the time box of the sprint, that is what is discussed and figured out in the first half of the sprint planning meeting. Now, on to the second half, the team figures out how the work will get done. So, first half was all about what is going to be done, and second half is where the team is figuring out how they are going to achieve whatever that they have set out for in this sprint. Sprint backlog items are broken down or decomposed if you remember the work breakdown structure. So items are then decomposed into tasks. By the way, all our videos are going to be linked in the description below. The first link is going to be a playlist of all the agile related videos that we have covered on this channel, and second playlist is going to be all the videos around the PMI ACP certification. So do check them out. Now back to our discussion. So in the second half, the sprint backlog items are decomposed into tasks. And what are these tasks? Each task should take 1 day or less to complete. So whatever the item that you have broken down into task, whatever that task is, should not exceed 1 day. Now that's how a sprint plan is created. Sprint plan is, of course, the outcome of the sprint planning meeting, which is what we are talking about. Now, you need to note that not every single sprint backlog item is decomposed in the time box that we have for the sprint planning, right? Because if we are doing a 2 week long sprint, then you only have 4 hours for sprint planning, and it is not possible. And this is the second half, which means you just have 2 hours. You cannot decompose every single sprint backlog item into tasks in those 2 hours. And that's why, at the very least, the team is expected to basically decompose the items that will be worked on the first few days of the sprint, and as we go on further, decomposition can be done. But in the 4 hours, first few days of work is at least decomposed. This is done to ensure that you don't just keep on doing decomposition and not starting the work itself. So for a 2 week long sprint, 4 hours is what you get for sprint planning, and you should be done in 4 hours to plan your sprint. Now, once you're done with sprint planning, the next meeting that you need to take care of is the daily scrum. And daily scrum is basically a meeting that takes place every day. It is time boxed at 15 minutes. So that's the time that you get for your daily scrum, and this takes place at the same time every day. So some teams do it in the morning, some teams do it towards the end of the day, but whatever time that the team selects, that's the time that is going to be allotted for the daily scrum meeting, and it should be 15-minute long. Now, who all participate in this meeting? You've got the development team, you've got Scrum Master, which are the usual attendees for these. The product owner is also strongly encouraged to join this meeting. And everyone in the team in this daily Scrum meeting has to answer 3 questions. Number one, what have I done since the last daily Scrum to meet the sprint goal? Remember, we came up with the sprint goal in our sprint planning session. So, what have I done since the last daily scrum to meet this sprint goal? Every person in this meeting answers this question. Second is, what will I do between now and the next daily scrum? So, what do I plan to do basically? And number three is, what roadblocks are in my way? So, if you're a scrum master, this is the question that you should be looking forward to the most, on what all are the roadblocks that the team is facing, so that you can ensure that those roadblocks are removed. So that's what daily scrum is all about. The next meeting here is sprint review. And before we talk about sprint review, I'd quickly like to remind you, please contribute to pmclounge.com if you like our work. You can head over to pmclounge.com/contribute and make a contribution. Okay, so now let's talk about the sprint review meeting. So sprint review again is obviously a meeting, and it involves the key users and stakeholders as well. So not just the development team, not just the scrum master, not just the product owner. You now have key users of the product that you're building, of the sprint that you're working on, and other stakeholders as well. All of them are invited by the product owner. Now, here your team is going to demonstrate whatever that you have built during the sprint. So, obviously, this meeting takes place at towards the end of the sprint. So you are going to demonstrate whatever that you have built during the sprint, and you're going to obtain feedback from the stakeholders and the key users. Now, product backlog. Remember, product backlog is where you pulled in items for your sprint backlog, right? So, product backlog is also discussed in this meeting. This ensures that everyone is aware of what they can expect in the next sprint. If you're doing 30-day sprint, then there is a time box for this meeting as well, which is 4 hours. Obviously, if you're doing a 2-week long sprint, then this meeting should not exceed 2 hours. So that's what sprint review meeting is all about. After this, the last meeting that you need to understand is sprint retro or the sprint retrospective. This is where the team figures out what went well and what can be improved moving forward. So this is sort of a retrospective where everyone is going to chime in. The participants include everyone on the development team. You've got the Scrum Master, you've got the product owner, and remember, you can also take feedback. The product owner might also take feedback from key stakeholders, key users, and the product owner is going to bring their point of view in as well. So this is what sprint retrospective is all about. Whatever improvements or the feedback suggested in this meeting is documented by the end of this meeting. Again, there is a time box for this meeting as well. If you are doing a 30-day sprint, then this meeting should not go beyond 3 hours. Obviously, if you're doing 2 weeks long sprint, then this meeting should not exceed 1.5 hours. That's how sprint retrospective work. The sprint is over when the time box expires. This is extremely important to understand. Sprint gets over when its time box expires. Just because you were not able to achieve the sprint goal, just because you were not able to build everything that was part of your sprint backlog, it does not mean that the sprint gets extended. In pure sprint environment, sprint expires when its time box expires. That's when the sprint is over, right? But in a real life, day-to-day scenarios, that might not be true. Or if it is true, you let me know in the comments below. So that's all that we had in this video. I hope you got value out of it. I hope you were able to understand the up and close of Scrum and Sprint. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon if you have not done so already. Also, don't forget to check out the website pmclounge.com, your number one free PMP resource. Thank you and have a nice day.